It was just another ordinary morning at the small local bank in the heart of the city, where the sun had barely climbed over the rooftops, and the streets outside were already buzzing with people hurrying to work, school, and errands. Inside, the bank was warm and quiet compared to the chaos of the streets, but there was still a steady hum of activity. The smell of coffee from the nearby cafe seeped in through the open doors, mixing with the faint scent of paper and ink that always lingered in banks. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a soft glow over the rows of counters where tellers attended to customers with practiced smiles. Among the tellers working that morning was a young woman named Claire. She had been at this bank for a few years and was known for being efficient, polite, and quick with numbers. But like anyone, she had her off days. Today was one of those mornings when she had barely slept, juggling family responsibilities, bills, and personal worries, all while trying to appear professional. Her line of sight was filled with a queue of customers, each waiting patiently, tapping fingers, or checking their phones, and she tried to keep up with the pace, feeling a quiet pressure in the pit of her stomach. At the same time, a black mother named Angela entered the bank, holding a folded check carefully in her hand. She had dressed neatly for her errands, her hair pulled back, and her eyes alert but tired from her early morning routine. Angela had been saving for months for this particular deposit, planning carefully how to manage her bills, her child's needs, and unexpected expenses. As she approached the counter, she gave a polite nod to Claire, hoping for a smooth transaction that would allow her to continue with her busy day. The atmosphere was calm but subtly tense. Banks always carried that strange mix of patience and urgency, a place where people trusted the staff but also felt the weight of waiting and accountability. Every person in line had their own story, their own worries, and their own hopes riding on the transaction they were about to make. Angela's story, however, was about more than just money. It carried her hopes for stability and the well-being of her family. Claire greeted Angela with a professional smile, though her mind was slightly distracted. Numbers, schedules, and reminders of tasks yet to be completed swirled in her head, making it difficult to focus entirely on the interaction. Angela handed over the check and Claire took it, sliding it across the counter with practiced efficiency. For a moment, everything seemed normal as it usually did in banks across the country. Transactions coming and going, people nodding politely, and the quiet hum of printers and computers completing their work in the background. But even in these ordinary moments, tension can linger like an invisible thread. Claire, caught between her internal stress and the need to maintain professionalism, didn't notice the slight crease in Angela's check or the importance it carried. Angela, on the other hand, watched closely, hoping the process would go smoothly, not realizing that something unusual was about to disrupt the calm routine of this ordinary day. The sounds of the bank were comforting yet ordinary, the soft tapping of keyboards, the occasional ring of the phone, the shuffling of papers, and the polite murmur of other customers. Claire tried to keep her focus, but a small sigh escaped her lips as she glanced at the growing line behind Angela. Every day felt like a balancing act, helping people efficiently while managing her own thoughts and stress. She was just another teller on an ordinary day, unaware that today's encounter would be far from ordinary. Angela, meanwhile, felt a mix of nervousness and determination. Every deposit mattered to her family, and she had experienced her share of small frustrations at banks before. She hoped that today, everything would be straightforward. Holding the check carefully, she tried to remind herself to stay calm and polite, even if things did not go perfectly. Little did she know, the ordinary day she anticipated was about to take a turn she would never forget. As the minutes passed, the ordinary morning continued, filled with small, routine moments that made up life inside the bank. The polite greetings, the shuffling of papers, the clicking of pens, and the occasional soft laughter from customers and tellers alike. But behind these everyday motions, the tension of personal stress, responsibility, and the unpredictable nature of human interaction quietly simmered, waiting to reveal itself in ways no one could have anticipated. This ordinary day, like countless others, started simply: a bank, a teller, a mother, and a check. Yet, it held within it the seed of an unexpected story, one that would transform a brief encounter into a moment of shock, reflection, and ultimately life-changing revelation for both Claire and Angela. What began as routine would soon turn into an unforgettable experience, reminding everyone involved that even the simplest days can carry the weight of profound human emotion. Angela stepped closer to the counter, her hand holding the check a little tighter than usual. She had rehearsed this simple transaction in her mind a dozen times during her morning commute. Hand over the check, wait for it to be processed, and walk out with confirmation that everything was in order. It seems simple enough, but life has a way of turning the simplest moments into something far more complicated. Claire, the teller, reached for the check with a mechanical smile, her mind still clouded with the morning's stress. Her thoughts raced with unfinished tasks, overdue emails, and the growing line of customers waiting impatiently behind Angela. She prided herself on being efficient, but the constant pressure sometimes made her snap in ways she didn't expect. Today, the weight of all those small stresses had built up to a fragile tension, and Claire barely realized how close she was to losing her composure. The check slipped slightly as Claire tried to handle it, and in a split second, frustration overtook her usual professionalism. Whether it was the crease she didn't like or just a moment of irritability, she tore the check sharply in half. The paper ripped with a loud, final sound, echoing across the quiet bank, and Angela froze, her heart sinking. Her hands tightened around her purse, and for a moment she could hardly believe what had just happened. "Oh," Angela started, her voice caught somewhere between shock and disbelief, but she didn't finish. She stared at the ripped pieces of her carefully prepared check, feeling a strange mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. It wasn't just paper, it was her time, her hard-earned money, and her plans for the week that had been literally torn apart in an instant. Claire's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause around them. She had acted on impulse, and immediately, the gravity of her action hit her. The routine day she had expected to navigate without incident had suddenly turned into something she couldn't control. Other customers glanced over, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Some shifted in their seats, others whispered quietly to themselves. The bank, which had felt calm just moments ago, now carried a charged tension that seemed almost tangible. Angela's voice returned, firm but controlled. "Excuse me, you can't just do that," she said, her words measured, holding back the surge of emotion that threatened to spill out. Every syllable was an effort to maintain composure, but her frustration was clear. This was her hard work, her responsibility, and seeing it destroyed in seconds ignited a fire inside her. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the pieces, muttering an almost inaudible apology. She wanted to fix it, to rewind the moment and handle things differently, but it was too late. The check was in pieces, and the moment of mistake had already left its mark. Her mind raced with embarrassment and guilt, realizing she had allowed a brief lapse of judgment to define her professional behavior. She felt exposed, aware of the eyes on her and the disapproval in the air. Angela, sensing Claire's panic, took a deep breath. She could feel the stares of other customers, the quiet murmur of the bank staff, and the awkward tension in the room, but she refused to let it break her spirit. She gently laid the torn pieces of the check on the counter and said, "I need this fixed. Please handle this properly." Her tone was calm but firm, a reflection of her patience, dignity, and determination to ensure her hard work was respected. For a few long moments, the teller and the customer stared at each other, both caught in a mixture of tension, shame, and a flicker of understanding. Claire's stress had collided with Angela's patience, creating a small but powerful storm that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of depositing a check. It was a reminder that even ordinary days can contain moments of high emotion and conflict, moments that reveal the humanity of both the teller and the customer. The other customers began to quietly return to their own transactions, sensing that the storm had passed but leaving behind a ripple of curiosity. The bank's soft hum of activity gradually returned, though the energy at Angela's counter remained thick with tension. Both women were acutely aware that this moment, this split second of anger and reaction, had left a mark, one that would linger far beyond the torn pieces of paper. In that ordinary bank, on what had started as a normal day, a simple check had become the focal point of human emotion, exposing stress, accountability, and the delicate balance between professionalism and empathy. What seemed like a minor incident at first glance was now the catalyst for something far more meaningful, a story that would unfold in ways neither Angela nor Claire could yet imagine. Angela took a slow, steadying breath as she looked down at the torn pieces of her check, her mind racing through the practical problems and the frustration of what had just happened. She had planned her day carefully, every step accounted for, and now the small act of depositing a check had turned into a humiliating and stressful situation. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, not out of fear, but from the sharp sting of disappointment and disbelief. For a moment, she considered raising her voice, letting anger take over, and expressing every ounce of frustration boiling inside her. But Angela had learned over the years that calmness often carried more power than shouting, that life rarely rewarded overreaction, and that dignity was something no one could take from her unless she allowed it. So she exhaled slowly and chose her words with care, her voice steady but firm. "Please, I need this corrected. This check is important," she said. Her eyes met Claire's, searching for a flicker of understanding, a sign that the teller recognized the weight of her mistake. Claire, in turn, looked back at Angela with a mix of guilt, shame, and regret. The young teller's hands were slightly trembling as she tried to piece the check together, realizing that no amount of apology could immediately erase the impact of her action. The moment was heavy, filled with a silent tension that neither of them wanted, yet both could feel lingering between them. Angela's mind was already racing ahead, thinking about the bills she needed to pay, the responsibilities waiting at home, and the plan she had worked on to manage her family's needs. Every piece of that plan now seemed fragile, threatened by the unintentional act of someone who had not understood the importance of a simple piece of paper. Yet, beneath the frustration, there was also a quiet strength, a determination not to allow this incident to derail her day or her dignity. She took another deep breath, this time letting a small, almost imperceptible wave of compassion enter her thoughts. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the irritation or embarrassment, but Angela understood that Claire's outburst had likely come from stress, exhaustion, or an unnoticed moment of impatience. This realization didn't excuse the action, but it softened the sharp edges of her initial reaction, allowing her to respond with a balance of firmness and understanding. The other customers in line had begun to whisper among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unusual scene, yet Angela remained focused, aware that the eyes around her were not what mattered. What mattered was restoring order to the situation, ensuring that her check would be processed correctly, and teaching in her own calm way that respect and responsibility could not be ignored. Claire carefully began to reassemble the pieces of the torn check, her movements tentative, as if handling something fragile not only physically but emotionally as well. She stammered an apology, her voice low and uncertain, and Angela listened, noting the sincerity behind the words. That small recognition of guilt mattered more than the words themselves. It was a first step toward restoring balance in a moment that had threatened to spiral out of control. Angela finally nodded, acknowledging both the apology and the effort being made to correct the situation. It was a subtle gesture, but one that carried weight, signaling that she valued accountability, kindness, and understanding even in the face of mistakes. Her posture remained composed, her tone measured, as she quietly observed the teller's response. This exchange, simple yet profound, revealed the strength of patience, the importance of emotional control, and the human capacity to forgive, while still standing firm. In that ordinary bank, what began as a simple transaction had transformed into a lesson in resilience and grace. Angela's response reminded everyone in that small space that even moments of conflict could be handled with dignity, awareness, and calm, that her reaction, composed yet firm, could diffuse tension, teach respect, and leave an impression that far outlasted the torn paper. As the check was finally corrected and ready to be processed, Angela's heart settled slightly. Her day was still full of responsibilities, challenges, and plans, but in that moment she felt a quiet pride in how she had handled the unexpected. She had turned frustration into focus, embarrassment into a demonstration of dignity, and anger into measured action. It was a victory not over the teller, but over circumstance, stress, and the small, unavoidable disruptions that life sometimes throws at. Ordinary days. After Angela left the counter, Claire sat back in her chair, staring blankly at the pieces of the torn check that had been hastily stacked in front of her. The bank had returned to its usual rhythm. The soft hum of computers, the quiet murmur of customers, the occasional beep of machines. But Claire's mind was far from ordinary. She felt a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, a mixture of guilt, shame, and disbelief at her own actions. She replayed the incident over and over in her head, each moment sharper than the last. The way Angela had held herself, calm but firm, her eyes steady despite the shock of the torn check, had left a deep impression on Claire. It wasn't just a check. It was a person's life, a part of someone's hard work and planning, and she had destroyed it in a single, careless motion. Claire's hands shook slightly as she rested them on the counter, remembering the exact sound the paper had made when it tore. A simple sound, yet it echoed in her mind like a warning bell, reminding her that small actions could carry enormous consequences. She realized for the first time in a long while, how easy it was to let stress and impatience take over, and how quickly ordinary moments could spiral into mistakes that affected someone else deeply. Her reflection went beyond that single incident. Claire began thinking about her job, the pressure she faced every day, and how often she allowed herself to become mechanical, responding to people as tasks rather than human beings. She had been trained to be efficient, polite, and professional, but today none of that had mattered. In one impulsive act, she had broken the trust placed in her by a customer, and the image of Angela's calm, disappointed gaze haunted her. Claire thought about her own life outside the bank, the stress of bills, her parents' expectations, and her desire to prove herself in a career that often felt unappreciated. She realized that while her problems were real, They were no excuse for the harm she had caused. The incident forced her to confront a hard truth. Professionalism wasn't just about doing the job efficiently, it was about empathy, awareness, and respect for every person who walked through the door. She remembered the moment Angela had spoken, her voice steady, her words firm but not angry, the way she had demanded respect without yelling, the quiet strength she had shown. It stayed with Claire like a mirror reflecting her own failure, yet instead of bitterness or resentment, it sparked something else. A desire to be better, to make amends, and to ensure that no one else would feel the way Angela had felt in that brief, painful moment. Claire closed her eyes and let herself imagine how she could have handled things differently. Each scenario played out in her mind. A smile, a careful handling of the check, an apology before a mistake even happened. Each version felt better, cleaner, more humane, and Claire wished she could rewind time and act that way. The regret she felt wasn't fleeting. It settled deep in her chest, a constant reminder of the lesson she had learned too late. She also reflected on the fragility of human interactions, how small actions, ripping a check, a glance, a word, could carry weight far beyond their immediate moment. Today she had seen the ripple effect of her impulsive decision. A mother's frustration, the quiet embarrassment of other customers, and the silent judgment of her own conscience. It was a humbling realization, one that made her reevaluate not only her job performance but her character. By the time her lunch break approached, Claire felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The day had started like any other, routine and predictable, yet she was ending it with a newfound awareness. A heavy burden of regret pressed down on her. But with it came a chance to grow, to approach her job differently, and to handle future encounters with patience, kindness, and attention. She promised herself that the next time a customer approached, she would see not just a task but a person, a story, and a life behind every interaction. As she stared out the window at the bustling city street, Claire realized that today had been more than a lesson in banking. It had been a lesson in humanity, humility, and personal responsibility. She felt the weight of her actions, but also the spark of hope that change was possible, that even small moments of reflection could lead to a better tomorrow, and that no one was beyond learning, growing, or making amends. A few days had passed since the incident with Angela's check, and Claire tried to push the memory out of her mind, but it lingered like a quiet shadow, reminding her of her mistake at every unexpected moment. One afternoon, after finishing her shift, she decided to take a short walk to clear her thoughts and shake off the tension that had been weighing on her all week. The streets were busy with people rushing home from work, parents holding hands with children, and street vendors calling out their daily specials. Yet Claire barely noticed the crowd. Her mind wandered over and over the events at the bank, the tear in the check, Angela's calm but firm voice, and the sense of regret that had refused to leave her. She felt small and exposed, wondering if she could ever make up for what had happened. As she turned a corner near the main square, a large billboard came into view, towering above the street with bright lights and bold colors. It was a familiar advertising space that usually showcased local businesses or seasonal promotions. But today something caught Claire's attention immediately. Her eyes widened, and her breath hitched slightly as if the world had stopped for a single heartbeat. There on the billboard was the face of a young boy, smiling proudly, his eyes bright and confident. The boy looked familiar in a way that made her heart skip a beat, and then it hit her. This was Angela's son, the boy she had glimpsed briefly during the transaction at the bank, the same boy whose mother's check she had torn just days ago. Claire stopped in her tracks, staring up at the massive image of the boy, realizing that this was no ordinary photograph, but a recognition of his achievement, something remarkable that had earned him a spot on the billboard, representing his hard work, talent, and determination. The irony was striking. She had seen only the mother and the torn check, unaware of the incredible story behind the boy and the family. A wave of mixed emotions washed over her. Shock, awe, guilt, and admiration collided in a rush of clarity. She had judged the situation in a single moment, reacting impulsively without understanding the full story, yet now she saw the depth of what she had overlooked. The mother and son were not ordinary customers. They were people with dreams, achievements, and a life far richer than she had imagined. Claire felt a lump in her throat, realizing that her small act of carelessness had been set against a backdrop of real triumph. She thought about the way Angela had carried herself during the check incident, calm, dignified, and resilient, and now she understood why. Angela's strength had not been about patience alone. It had been born from the pride and hope she had in her son, a young boy whose potential was being recognized for the world to see. For a long moment, Claire just stood there, staring at the billboard, letting the impact sink in. It was humbling and powerful, a reminder that life often holds surprises beyond what anyone can predict, that a single moment, ripping a check, showing impatience, can seem monumental, but in the grander scheme, it may be insignificant compared to the human stories unfolding all around. The twist of fate left Claire feeling both ashamed and inspired. She had been given an unexpected gift. The chance to witness success, resilience, and talent firsthand, albeit indirectly, and to reflect on her own actions in a new light. The boy's smile on the billboard was not just a face. It was a symbol of possibility, hope, and the hidden depths behind every person who crosses her path. In that unexpected moment, Claire realized that life had a way of teaching lessons in the most surprising ways. Sometimes, the lessons came quietly through reflection and regret, but other times they arrived suddenly, through a twist of fate or a revelation so striking that it could not be ignored. Seeing Angela's son on the billboard was one of those moments, unforgettable and transformative. As she continued walking, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew she had to carry this lesson forward in everything she did, treat every customer, every person, every encounter with care, empathy, and awareness, because behind every face is a story she may never fully see, and every action has the power to shape someone's day, or life, in ways she could never anticipate. The ordinary day had shifted into the extraordinary, and Claire walked with a quiet determination, vowing never to underestimate the human story behind a simple transaction again. Claire walked slowly down the busy street, the image of the boy on the billboard still fresh in her mind. Her heartbeat was steady, but inside, a storm of thoughts and emotions swirled. She felt the weight of her actions at the bank more acutely now, each thought reminding her of how a moment of carelessness had caused unnecessary stress and embarrassment to Angela. She paused for a moment at a quiet corner, letting the noise of the city fade into the background as she reflected. It was humbling, almost painfully so, to realize how quickly she had judged the situation without understanding the full story. In that instant, she had seen only a customer and a piece of paper, failing to recognize the human life and dignity attached to it. Claire's mind traveled back to the day of the incident, the sound of the tearing check echoing like a warning bell. She remembered Angela's calm composure, the way she had handled the situation without shouting or losing control, and it struck Claire that true strength and grace often went unnoticed, yet had the power to teach lessons far deeper than any words. The boy on the billboard had changed everything. His bright smile, confident stance, and obvious achievement made Claire confront her own limitations and biases. She realized that the bank transaction she had thought trivial was actually part of someone else's story, a small but significant step in their journey, something she had almost ruined in a fleeting moment of frustration. Humility settled over her, softening the edges of her guilt and opening a window for reflection. Claire understood that she had allowed the pressures of her own life to cloud her judgment, reacting impulsively instead of seeing the bigger picture. Every person who walked into the bank had their own story, struggles, dreams, and triumphs, yet she had failed to recognize that the moment on the billboard had been a mirror, showing her both her mistake and the path toward growth. She realized, too, that her understanding of empathy had been incomplete. It wasn't enough to apologize mechanically or follow procedures. It meant truly seeing people, valuing their lives, and understanding the potential consequences of even small actions. Claire felt a quiet shame, but along with it came clarity, a chance to become more thoughtful, careful, and humane in her work. As she continued walking, Claire pictured Angela at home, possibly telling her son about the incident at the bank without letting him feel hurt or embarrassed. Her patience and dignity shone in her mind, making Claire feel a mix of admiration and regret. She understood that true character wasn't just about reacting correctly in perfect situations. It was about handling mistakes, stress, and unexpected challenges with grace. The humbling realization deepened when Claire thought about how easily she could have let pride, impatience, or bias dictate her actions in future encounters. She promised herself that this moment would remain a guide, a reminder that no one's story was simple, no person insignificant, and no action without consequence. The billboard had not just displayed a child's achievement, it had revealed a lesson Claire needed to carry with her. For the first time in days, Claire felt a strange mixture of regret and gratitude. She was embarrassed by her own behavior but thankful for the unexpected opportunity to learn. Life had given her a mirror, showing her both the mistake she had made and the human potential she had nearly overlooked. The realization left her both humbled and inspired, a rare combination that sparked a desire to improve and to make amends in her small but meaningful way. As she looked up at the sky, watching clouds drift lazily, Claire felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle over her. She would never forget the mother's calm strength, the boy's bright smile, or the way a simple, ordinary day could carry lessons that changed perspective and character. Humility had arrived in the form of reflection, observation, and recognition, and Claire embraced it fully, knowing it was the first step toward becoming a better teller, a better person, and someone more aware of the stories hidden behind every face. The city buzzed around her, but Claire's mind was quiet, focused, and thoughtful. She had learned that even small moments mattered, and that understanding, respect, and humility could turn a moment of regret into a lifelong lesson. And as she walked toward home, she felt a subtle but powerful shift inside herself, ready to face every day with awareness, care, and the quiet strength born from a humbling realization. The next morning, Claire arrived at the bank with a sense of determination she hadn't felt before. The incident with Angela's check lingered in her mind like a shadow, reminding her that she could no longer let stress, impatience, or carelessness dictate her actions. Today she decided she would take responsibility, face the consequences, and do what she could to make amends. Angela entered the bank mid-morning as she usually did, carrying herself with her characteristic grace and calm confidence. Claire noticed her immediately, her heart tightening slightly at the thought of approaching her after the mishap. She felt nervous, almost as if she were walking into a room where she would be judged not only for a past mistake but for her character itself. Taking a deep breath, Claire stepped forward and approached the counter where Angela had waited before. Her hands were slightly trembling, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Ms. Angela, I want to sincerely apologize for what happened the other day with your check. I should never have acted the way I did, and I regret the stress and frustration I caused you," she said. Angela looked up, her eyes calm and attentive as if she had been expecting this moment. Her expression was composed, showing neither anger nor condescension, just a quiet attentiveness that invited honesty. "Thank you for saying that," Angela replied, her voice warm but firm. "It wasn't easy, but I appreciate that you're acknowledging it," she said. Claire felt a wave of relief but knew the apology was only the first step. She explained what she had learned in the days since the incident. The regret, the reflection, the realization of how important it was to see the person behind the transaction. She spoke honestly about her humbling experience seeing Angela's son on the billboard, about how it made her rethink her actions and the way she interacted with people. Angela listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her gaze steady and kind. There was a sense of understanding in her expression, a recognition that Claire's words were sincere, and that the young teller was taking responsibility. Not everyone responds to mistakes with such openness, and Angela seemed to recognize the effort it took for Claire to confront her own behavior. Finally, Claire reached out with a small gesture, offering a hand to express her goodwill and to symbolize a fresh start. Angela smiled faintly, and with a graceful nod, she accepted it. The simple act of handshake and eye contact carried more weight than words, sealing a moment of reconciliation that was both emotional and deeply human. The conversation shifted naturally after the apology, with Claire asking if there was anything she could do to make the process smoother or to ensure no future mistakes occurred. Angela responded with patience, suggesting a few ways to handle transactions carefully. She emphasized understanding the customer's perspective and taking a moment to truly see the human story behind every request. As the exchange ended, Claire felt a profound sense of closure mixed with inspiration. The heavy burden of guilt had lifted, replaced by the light of understanding and connection. She realized that making amends wasn't just about correcting a mistake. It was about showing empathy, taking responsibility, and learning from the experience. Angela, too, seemed affected in a subtle way, perhaps by seeing someone genuinely reflect and change, perhaps by witnessing a human being step up and take accountability with humility. Either way, the moment marked a turning point, not just in Claire's professional life but in her personal growth as well. Walking back to her desk, Claire felt lighter, her steps steady, her mind clear. She knew she had been given a second chance, not just to serve customers better, but to carry the lessons of patience, empathy, and awareness into every interaction. The incident with Angela and her son had left an indelible mark, but it had also created an opportunity for growth and a deeper understanding of humanity. For the first time in days, Claire felt a quiet confidence, a belief that even mistakes could be transformed into meaningful lessons, that acknowledging error, showing remorse, and taking steps to reconcile could create trust and understanding rather than resentment. The day that had begun like any other had become a turning point, a testament to the power of humility, empathy, and sincere action. And as Angela left the bank later that afternoon, Claire watched her go with a sense of respect and admiration, knowing that in making amends she had not only repaired a moment of wrongdoing but also grown as a person, embracing a path of integrity, awareness, and compassion that would guide her long after the incident faded from memory. The weeks that followed the incident at the bank passed quietly, yet the memory of that day remained vivid in Claire's mind. Each interaction, each customer, and each moment at her desk now carried a subtle reminder of the lesson she had learned. The torn check, Angela's calm demeanor, and the image of her son on the billboard had all left marks that shaped the way she approached her work and her life. Claire found herself paying closer attention to the people around her, noticing the small details that had previously gone unseen, a customer's nervous fidget, a child tugging at their parent's sleeve, the quiet sigh of someone waiting for service. All these little moments now carried meaning. Each encounter became an opportunity not just to complete a task but to connect, to empathize, and to recognize the human story behind every face. She thought often about Angela and her son, recalling the quiet strength with which Angela had handled the torn check and the pride reflected in her son's image on the billboard. It was a humbling reminder that people often carry unseen achievements, struggles, and dreams, and that a single moment of impatience or carelessness could unintentionally overshadow them. Claire's newfound awareness extended beyond her job, seeping into her personal life as well. She treated family, friends, and strangers with more patience, understanding, and consideration, recognizing that everyone carries unseen burdens and aspirations. That simple act of reflection had transformed her, shaping her into someone more mindful, empathetic, and aware. The incident became a story Claire would quietly recount to herself in moments of doubt or stress, a personal reminder that life's small interactions could carry extraordinary significance. She realized that lessons often come in unexpected ways, through mistakes and reflections, and that humility was not a weakness but a guide to better choices. Months later, Claire passed the same street where she had seen Angela's son on the billboard. The image was gone, replaced by a new advertisement, but the memory of that moment remained as sharp and vivid as ever. It was more than a billboard. It was a symbol of recognition, potential, and the unforeseen ways life can teach empathy and reflection. She smiled to herself, realizing that the ordinary day that had begun with a routine bank transaction had turned into an extraordinary journey of personal growth. Claire had learned to see beyond the surface, to approach each person with care, and to handle mistakes with humility. The lesson had not been about banking, checks, or even apologies. It had been about humanity, respect, and awareness. For Angela and her son, life continued with its own rhythm, full of accomplishments and ordinary moments. But for Claire, the impact of that day remained transformative, shaping her interactions, her decisions, and her understanding of human connection. She felt gratitude for the unexpected teacher that life had provided through a torn check, a mother's patience, and a child's bright smile. In quiet moments at her desk, Claire would think about how fragile yet powerful human interactions could be, and how a single act, whether careless or thoughtful, could ripple far beyond the moment it occurred. She understood now that respect, empathy, and patience were not just values to be spoken but actions to be lived. Every decision, every gesture, and every interaction had the potential to uplift or harm. By embracing this understanding, Claire felt more grounded, more compassionate, and more responsible. She approached each day with a quiet determination to do better, to see more clearly, and to act with care, knowing that life's lessons often came disguised in small, ordinary moments. Each person she encountered became a reminder that behind every face lies a story worth honoring. And so, what had begun as an ordinary day at the bank ended as a profound journey of personal transformation. The torn check, the mother's calm strength, and the boy's proud image on a billboard had together created a lasting lesson. One of humility, empathy, and the power of reflection. Claire carried it with her always, ready to live her life with more awareness, kindness, and understanding than she ever had before. Life, she realized, had a quiet way of turning mistakes into lessons, accidents into revelations, and ordinary moments into extraordinary opportunities to grow. And in that understanding, Claire found not just regret or humility, but hope, purpose, and a commitment to live with empathy, awareness, and heart.